Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of San Rafael's first virtual community conversation about housing. I'm Ali Judici. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of San Rafael. Before we get started, I'm going to have Barry provide some very important information about Spanish translation. Barry?
Great. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, we'd like to announce that tonight's meeting is going to be translated into Spanish and Vietnamese simultaneously by interpreters who are here with us this evening. We have a Spanish and Vietnamese Zoom channel respectively. They'll be open from now until the end of the meeting. You can join the Spanish or Vietnamese channel by clicking on the interpretation icon in the Zoom bar, which is at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a small globe. As a reminder, we ask that everyone participating tonight speak slowly to allow our interpreters to effectively express your comments. I'm now going to ask that what I just explained be explained also in Spanish and then in Vietnamese.
Bueno, buenas noches. Antes de comenzar, nos gustaría anunciar que la reunión del Consejo esta noche incluirá interpretación simultánea en español y vietnamita, proporcionada por intérpretes calificados en los canales de Zoom en español y vietnamita, respectivamente, ahora hasta la finalización de la reunión.
Nhìn ở dưới cái bar của mình đó thì có cái ký hiệu đó, thì cô chú click vô ký hiệu này rồi xong vô cái Việt Nam mình con nha.
Okay, thank you, Nelly and Pablo, for the explanation. I hope that everyone was able to get that. And I'm going to turn it back to Ali now.
Thank you so much, Barry. I am actually going to take this moment to introduce our council member, Rachel Kurtz, who will be providing some opening remarks before I continue the next part of my presentation. We have Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Judici, and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us virtually tonight for this first of what will be several community conversations focused on updating San Rafael's housing element. The housing element is a document that the city uses to guide its policies and actions for supporting the housing needs for everyone who calls or would like to call San Rafael home. Tonight, we'll have an opportunity to talk about something that affects all of us. That is how housing has impacted each of us in our lives and the types of housing and housing support San Rafael needs most. Whether you've lived here your whole life or just moved here, housing and social services support is critical to our present and to our future. And although we are required to prepare a housing plan to meet state law, this is also an opportunity to think big and get creative. It's a chance to talk about what our needs are, where our opportunities are, and what the obstacles are. The update to the housing element is an opportunity to address struggles that many of us, along with our friends and our family members, have been experiencing in Marin and the Bay Area. I know many of us either have experienced some of this or have heard this. Long commutes because there aren't enough housing options nearby. Our kids can't think of living here because they can't figure out how they would afford to live here as adults. Our tenants are doubling up in apartments, sometimes doubling up, sometimes tripling up in a 2-bedroom place because of high rents. Our seniors needing to downsize, but having limited local options. Residents facing difficulties finding decent housing because of language barriers, disabilities, the persisting effects of past discriminatory housing policies, and other barriers. Or simply, the financial hardship of housing payments that consume most of our incomes. We know these are stories because we've heard these stories. By being here tonight and contributing your stories and perspectives, you are helping shape the long-term vision for our community's development. I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's event, one of many, to learn more about the update process and to begin the conversation. Thank you for being here, and I'll hand it back to Ali.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Kurtz. So as Councilmember Kurtz mentioned, tonight is the first of several meetings we're going to be holding regarding the housing element. We're going to talk more about housing in our city, to discuss new state housing laws and how that affects our housing update. And we're going to have opportunities to develop new housing policies that address the city's housing needs. Over the next 8 months, there's going to be additional opportunities to participate, and we expect that we're going to hold additional community meetings this winter and spring. And Barry will be telling you more about that later on this evening. For those of you who are here, we'd like to remind you that this meeting is being recorded. So if you know of others that wanted to participate but weren't able to participate, please do share this information with them. They'll be able to get the recording of this meeting on our city's website. So go ahead and go to, well, we are already in this slide. So we're going to start off with a brief presentation that provides the context for the housing element and an overview of what the element itself is. The presentation also goes over the process the city will have to be going through to update the element and how you can participate. Barry will give you more detailed explanation about that. We'll have opportunities for questions and comments at the end. So we really look forward to having you share some ideas and any inspiration that you may have developed tonight or in the past related to housing. I wanted to mention that we have dedicated an email address specifically related to the housing element, and this is up on the screen right now, but I'll go ahead and read it. It's housing@cityofsanrafael.org. And we encourage you to send ideas to us and messages to us as you are inspired. So can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some introductions. I've already introduced myself, so I won't do that again, but I would like to introduce our new housing manager, Jacob Noonan. Jacob just started with us recently and has jumped in and just hit the ground running. He has already been engaged with Barry and really developed some, together with Barry, has developed some great ideas on how to proceed with this update and how to engage community members. I'd also like to introduce Alexis Kaptanian. She is our housing analyst and will be side by side working with Barry and with Jacob. And again, the same, Alexis started, I want to say about a month ago. It feels like she's been here longer than that. She has already provided so much information, developed some data for us to use. Was instrumental in this setting up this meeting and making sure everything was organized and ready to go for tonight. So I want to thank Alexis for that. And of course, Barry Miller, who has participated or basically managed the general plan for us over the last few years. He did an amazing job, and I really look forward to having Barry continue to work with us in developing this housing element update and getting it to the city council in a pretty quick pace. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just pass the mic over to Barry and have him continue with the presentation.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Allie, and welcome and good evening, everybody. As Allie said, I'm Barry Miller, the consulting project manager for the housing element update. We wanted to start out with some ground rules for the meeting. Probably many of you who are in the participant area have done Zoom meetings before, but if you haven't, and actually just for a reminder, we are encouraging you to use that chat window that's on your margin to provide questions and comments throughout the presentation. We are going to be talking for about 30 minutes, and then we'll use the rest of the time we have with you this evening for both responding to questions that have come in on the chat and hearing from you directly by promoting you from the attendee area to the panelist area where we are so that we can hear you live. During that period of the meeting, we're asking that you use the raise hand feature, which is on your the bottom of your screen. We are asking that you please be brief so that everyone has a chance to speak once we bring you over to make a comment. We're asking that you respect each other's opinion. We know this is an emotional subject and a subject that we may have diverse views on. This is really intended to be a listening session. It's also our first meeting. So this, as has been said by a couple of folks already, it's the first of several meetings. There'll be many more opportunities for input. We'll go over those during this presentation. If you don't get a chance to speak today or say what you want, please do email us at the housing@cityofsanrafael.org address that you see on your screen. Lastly, I just want to put a plug in for the fact that technology happens. We don't profess to be perfect. We've gotten pretty good at doing Zoom meetings, but we ask for your patience in the event we have glitches or technical difficulties as we proceed during the next 90 minutes.
Yes, and Barry, I just want to take this moment to announce one thing which, CM, I'm hoping you can translate after I speak, which is that we're having our first technical difficulty, which is that Vietnamese has not come up as an option on the interpretation. And so it will say Korean. If you need the Vietnamese interpretation, please select Korean. It will not be a Korean interpretation. It will be in Vietnamese.
Thank you, Alexis.
Should I translate that now?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Xiêm.
Dạ, thưa quý vị, trước khi chúng tôi bắt đầu thì xin báo tin rằng buổi họp hôm nay của Hội đồng thành phố sẽ được thông dịch bằng tiếng Việt Nam. Tuy nhiên khi quý vị nhìn lên màn hình đó thì cái quả cầu mà để chọn ngôn ngữ đó thì lại không có tiếng Việt ở đó. Quý vị nên chọn Korean, tức là tiếng Đại Hàn đó. Thì mặc dù nó để là Korean nhưng mà quý vị sẽ nghe thông dịch tiếng Việt ạ. Dạ, xin quý vị lưu ý dùm là mình có thông dịch tiếng Việt, tuy nhiên quý vị phải bấm vào chỗ quả cầu là nói tiếng Korean ạ. Dạ, xin cảm ơn quý vị. Như là một lời nhắc nhở thì chúng tôi yêu cầu quý vị thành viên tham gia buổi họp hôm nay nói chậm rãi để các thông dịch viên của chúng ta có thể diễn đạt ý tưởng của quý vị một cách rõ ràng và đầy đủ. Dạ, xin cảm ơn. I'm done.
Thank you, Xiêm. One of the advantages of doing this by Zoom is that we do have some instant polling capacity here, and we'd like to know a little bit more about who our audience is this evening. I'm going to ask Alexis to put up the polling question here. We're asking folks in the audience to indicate where you live. If you are a homeowner in San Rafael, a renter in San Rafael, if you live somewhere else, or none of the above. Somewhere else in Marin County, I should say.
Xin quý vị cho biết là trên cái màn hình mà quý vị nhìn thấy đó là quý vị ở San Rafael là chủ nhân của nhà, hay là quý vị ở thuê, hay là quý vị ở một nơi khác cũng của Marin County nhưng mà không phải là San Rafael. Dạ.
Xiêm, thank you. We will have interpretation on the Vietnamese channel. And so I will toggle you in about 30 minutes. And so no need to interpret at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like only about half of you have responded to this question. Hopefully, we'll give folks just a little more time, but hopefully everyone is able to use the polling feature. I'll give it about another 15 seconds. And okay, let's close the poll. At this point, we have about 30% of you who are homeowners, about 43% who are renters, a couple of folks who live somewhere else in the county, and a couple who live outside of Marin County. Hoping that we can maybe get a few more participating in the next round. And let's move on to our next polling question. I think I need to end the poll here. And now we're having another one of those technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay, where do you work? So for those who are employed, your regular place of work is in San Rafael. Your regular place of work is outside of San Rafael. You're not currently working, for example, if you're retired, or other. So these 4 choices, and we're hoping you can help us with responses using the polling feature. And again, a lot of folks who are not participating, we want to encourage you if you can, but we do have a few more this time than last time. And it looks like we have about half of you who work in San Rafael, about a third who work outside of San Rafael, a few who are not currently working, and 1 person who indicated other. Got a few more of these polling questions coming up. Okay, the next question is, how long have you lived in San Rafael? And if you can see the choices here on the screen, and please let us know how long you've been a resident. Okay, it looks like we have a good representation of longtime residents here, but we've got a few new residents as well. Okay, so we have about a little more than half of you have lived in San Rafael for more than 20 years. And then about 16% who have lived here for 11 to 20 years. Just a few of you who have lived here for less than 10 years, and a few non-residents also. I think we have 1 more demographic question here. And this is about your age. So we would like to know your age in these 5 different categories that are provided. And this helps us also understand where we need to do more work on our outreach program. Our over 65 community is well represented this evening, about almost half of you. Looks like we've got some folks in each of the age categories that are shown on the screen, except under 18. We have about 17% in the 18 to 34s, 22% in the 35 to 49s. So I should add too, we're gonna do some outreach with our schools so we can hear from high schoolers and even younger kids on some of the topics we're gonna be talking about this evening. They'll be inheriting the city that we're creating now, and it's important to hear from them as well. I think we have 1 more here. Okay, so now we're asking just to test the chat feature. If you would, type a couple of words into your chat window, and the chat window is the little thing that looks like a quotation box up at it's at the top of my screen, but maybe at the bottom of your screen. Let us know what you think, a couple of words about what it's like to live in San Rafael. And I'm gonna ask Alexis in a couple of moments to read out some of the highlights, some of what we're hearing from you, thoughts about living it, what it's like to live in San Rafael. Just a few, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Sure, answers are already coming to the chat. I'm seeing vibrant and diverse, safe, calm, sunny and expensive, lovely, green, unique and vibrant, expensive, diverse and safe, wonderful. I love to hike in the hills.
Great, great. Okay, some of that is just to get you comfortable using the chat feature, but we also are looking for some of those common threads in your responses. And I think sunny and expensive sums it up. It's a good way of capturing it. With that, I'm going to introduce Jake Noonan, who's going to provide some of the context for why we're here tonight and talk a little bit more about kind of the housing situation before we begin describing the housing element. Jake?
Thank you so much, Barry. And thank you everyone for participating in the polls and for sharing a little about yourselves and what makes San Rafael special and unique. Those are wonderful thoughts. So in this next set of slides, I'm going to share information about how the amount of housing that has been built in prior years, or the lack thereof, has led to the high costs for housing and this great need for affordable housing options that we're faced with now. So on the next slide, you'll see here that throughout the Bay Area, not just in Marin, not just in San Rafael, but throughout the Bay Area, job growth, the number of jobs that are available and have located to the Bay Area has outpaced the amount of housing that's been built here in the Bay Area. And on this chart, the blue bars, well, that represents jobs in each county. And the orange bars show the number of housing units in each county. So, and this is for data in between 2010 and 2019. So this is, the last decade. You can see that during these last 10 years, the 9 Bay Area counties added, it's approximately about 1.3 million jobs. At the same time, though, we only produced 140,000 units of housing, or 1 unit of housing for every 9 jobs created. Now, in Marin, we didn't do that good. In Marin, there was 23,000 jobs added in the last decade, but only 1,300 houses built. So although it was a fairly low number of jobs increase in the county, the amount of housing that was built in the county was less. So that resulted in 1 housing unit for every 18 jobs created. Now, across the board, as I said, the Bay Area counties added significantly more jobs than housing. And although you saw the bigger impacts in Santa Clara, San Francisco, Alameda, it's all contributed to this imbalance. And by growing our economy without adding housing, we've seen longer commutes, more overcrowding, and significant increases to home prices. Now, next slide, please. And this isn't just a tech boom. It's not just about the growth in high income jobs at Google or Facebook, I guess Meta now, or other large employers in the Silicon Valley. The increase in the number of high income jobs tends to increase the number of middle and lower paying jobs. As more people move into the Bay Area, they're going to require more and more services and amenities. And this leads to an expanding economy across the board. So jobs in the service industries and in the middle income professions like healthcare and education, jobs in retail and in food services, in childcare, landscaping, construction, and other sectors that don't pay as well as those technology jobs are created as well. And housing options are needed for not just the higher end market, but across the board. So in this chart, what you're seeing here is we've broken the numbers of jobs and housing up by the income categories. And so you can see that the orange represents jobs and the blue is housing. And in this first bar on the left set of bars, this is low income housing, where you can see that in fact, we did add quite a bit of low income jobs, low paying jobs, but not much housing. And in the middle, the center is our moderate housing, our middle income housing. And we've done an even not as good of a job on building for the middle as we did for the low. We have increased jobs here, but not quite as much. But when we contrast that with the higher end jobs, we certainly added a sizable amount of high end jobs. We have done a better job of producing housing for high end households. But this has really, I think this slide in a nutshell really contributes to why the challenges, why we're having the challenge that we're experiencing over housing price and housing cost, that we just simply haven't been building enough housing, and we haven't been building it haven't been able to achieve it in the range of incomes that we need. When we look at the supply and how this lack of supply means higher prices, this graph shows the median house value in San Rafael over the last decade. And this is based on data from Zillow. We here in San Rafael, we've seen a 100% increase since 2012 in house price, with the median price increasing from around $640,000 9 years ago to over 1.2 million today. And we've also seen rents increasing, perhaps not as fast of a rate, but we certainly have seen that rents have been increasing at a sizable rate and faster than income. Next slide. So one concept is that we're not building for the missing middle. And this is a factor behind the high housing costs, that the missing middle includes townhomes, duplexes, small garden apartment buildings, other types of housing that they used to be really common in our cities and towns, but today have really been replaced by the single family suburban style districts. So we've seen construction of expensive single family homes at one end of the market, and we still have some amount of larger apartment and condo complexes located in the center cities or the urban areas on the other. But what we haven't been seeing is this reasonably priced housing that's always been an important part of our market itself. And so this has led to more limited opportunities for first-time home buyers and for young families. If you can imagine, in San Rafael, the data shows that townhomes and condos are selling for roughly half the price of housing of the cost of single-family homes, but there's so very little inventory available that there's not much in the pipeline, that there's really not that many opportunities for this needed type of housing. Next slide. And this is impacting our service workers. Service workers really can't afford to live here. This table shows the average wage in a number of jobs and occupations in Marin County. What you can see is the percentage of an annual income needed to afford the median priced apartment in San Rafael for folks that are in different occupations. So for instance, if you're let's take a preschool teacher here, the third line down, and you're living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, you would be spending almost 3/4 of your income on your rent and utilities to afford to live here. If you're a police officer, you may need to spend over 40% of your income on rent and utilities. So it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet and to have income left over for food and transportation and medical costs and other expenses. So some of the benefits of increasing our housing choices are that, well, we can create more opportunities for young families to find a first-time home, something that's been out of reach for many families with children right now. Just think about whether you could afford a home, the home that you live in today, if you're an owner, if the cost of that home was 1.5 or 1.6 million when you bought it. We could provide places for our kids to live as young adults. Right now, we know many of our kids will not be able to live in San Rafael as adults because there's no housing options for them. We can provide more options for seniors connected with supportive services, making it easier to continue living independently and to age in the community instead of moving to the Sierra foothills or to the Central Valley or somewhere else with more choices for older adults. And we can help people who work in the community, like faculty at Dominican, or employees at Safeway, or our local firefighters, find housing locally instead of commuting an hour each way. And that shorter commute translates into less traffic on our highways and reduced greenhouse gas emissions, which helps us achieve our climate goals for the future. And we can create stronger, more balanced communities that are inclusive and provide a great place where everyone is welcome. Next slide. So why isn't the housing being built? Now, there's a number of different reasons. When you look at the data, one question that comes up right away is, why isn't the housing we need getting built? Well, there's no easy answer. We're facing a complicated set of challenges that make it very difficult to find a solution. And no one city or town can solve the problem on its own. We all have to solve it together. We have a limited amount of buildable land. The Bay Area residents cherish open space and natural environment that makes our region a beautiful and desirable place to live. And we've preserved our hillsides and wetlands and much of our farmland. And we developed most of the flat buildable areas decades ago. What we're left with are mostly small sites that have been skipped over by development or already developed sites that can be repurposed. It's much harder to develop these sites than sites where the land is vacant. And secondly, we have a fiscal structure that favors commercial and industrial development over housing. Cities rely on sales taxes, hotel taxes, business taxes, and other revenue sources that come from commercial land. They sometimes have policies that favor jobs over housing as well, due to the higher cost of providing services to residential areas. And third, we have high land and construction costs. The cost of lumber has increased over 300% in the last year alone, and the cost of labor is very high. Other building materials are more expensive than they used to be, and the price of land is very expensive. So fourth, our environmental review and project review processes are critical, and we count on them to maintain our quality of life. But these processes and requirements add time and money to the cost of building housing. And finally, many projects face community opposition, and this can result in projects being delayed or scaled down, making housing more expensive and less profitable to build. So in closing, in my final slide, the state of California has gotten much more aggressive in recent years by adopting many new laws and requirements to deal with these factors. They've been particularly focused on eliminating constraints. These are limits that cities or jurisdictions or other parts in the pipeline have created related to and especially related to community processes and requirements around new housing. The laws that you see on the screen are only a small fraction of the bills that have been approved by the legislature and signed by the governor in the last 4 years. These laws have completely changed the landscape for what local governments can and can't do regarding housing in California, and a large part of why we're here today. So thank you for letting me take this time to lay out this groundwork, and I turn it back to Barry Miller, who's going to walk us through the housing element and what that means to update the housing element. Take it away, Barry.
And before we start with Barry's part of the presentation, I'm going to just pause for a moment. Stick with us as I toggle our interpreters. Hold on just a moment.
And Alexis, if you could give me a heads up when we're good to go, that would be great.
Barry, you can go ahead. We're having a little bit of trouble with our Vietnamese channel, but go ahead and I think we'll try to figure it out.
Okay, the next thing we're going to do before we talk about the housing element, we actually have 2 trivia questions. So we're going to use that Zoom polling feature again and ask you a San Rafael trivia question that is brand new data. It's actually now 3 or 4 months old, but it was brand new. When it was brand new, we were very excited about learning how many residents the city gained between 2010 and 2020. And we're asking you folks, what number do you think it was? We've got 3550, 2550, 1250, 450, or none, a lost population. And I think Alexis is actually dealing with the translation issue, so we're not seeing the poll. I might.
Oh, I'm bringing up the poll right now.
All right.
Okay, we are launched.
Cool. Okay, if those who are out there can take a guess at what the population gain was between 2010 and 2020. Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to end the poll and we're going to share the results. And this is what you thought. The 3550 and 2550 were your top answers. The correct answer is 3550. So we gained about 3,500 residents between 2010 and 2020. Here's the interesting thing about that is, let's look at the next slide, which is actually this. It's a two-part trivia question. If we can get this to advance to the next slide. How many housing units did San Rafael gain? So we gained 3,550 people, and we gained a certain number of homes during that same time period. And it's not a trick question, but there's a point that we're going to make from this slide and these statistics. If you can share the results. So most of you got the answer. It was 491. So we added 3,500 residents. We built less than 500 homes. If you do the math about that, what it really means is we have, number one, fewer vacant homes. Number two, more crowded homes. We have more apartments where there are multiple households living in a single unit, more people per average household in the city today than we did 10 years ago. And we'll be talking a little bit about that in the next few slides. So we're going to move now into a discussion of the housing element and then turn it back to hear from you. In a nutshell, the housing element is our guide to meeting local housing needs and addressing the challenges that Jake talked about in the earlier slides. This is not a new requirement. It's actually been something we've been required to do for the last more than 50 years. But the difference is the requirements have expanded a lot over the last 50 years, particularly over the last 20 years. And the housing element is the only part of our city's general plan, which is our long-range plan, that is updated on a specific schedule. In this case, every 8 years, we have to go through the process of preparing a new housing plan. It's the only part of our city's plan that's subject to approval and certification by a state agency. In this case, it's the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. And we submit this plan to them and we receive certification. Unlike the rest of our city's plans where we can select our own course, this element is subject to very detailed requirements for what has to be included. And at the end of the day, what we need to show during this process is that San Rafael is able to accommodate what's called our fair share of the region's housing needs. And that's not just an abstract concept. There is an actual number of units that we need to demonstrate that we can provide. So in terms of what's actually in the housing element, there are these 5 basic components. First, there's a needs assessment, which is based on data from the census that looks at factors like age, household size, language, employment, income, family structure, and the special needs of seniors, people with disabilities, those experiencing homelessness, and those with extremely low incomes. This section also looks at the housing market and condition of our housing stock. Second, there's an evaluation of the prior housing element, and we do have a housing element now. It was adopted in January 2015, and we will be doing an evaluation to see where we've fallen short, what kind of progress we've made, and how we can do better during the next 8 years. Third, there's an evaluation of housing constraints. These are the things that make it difficult to build housing in the city. Some of these are government constraints, like our zoning regulations, our permitting fees, in our processes, and some are constraints that are somewhat out of our hands, like the real estate market, the cost of construction and land, and environmental constraints and infrastructure constraints. Fourth, there's an evaluation of our resources to build housing. And this is the part of the housing element that many of you may be familiar with, because this is where we have an inventory of all of the sites in San Rafael where housing is permitted and where we can potentially build housing in the future. It's also where we look at our financial resources to help housing, particularly affordable housing, be constructed. And finally, in the blue box at the far right, you see affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a requirement that we evaluate fair housing practices, including lending patterns, eviction patterns, fair housing referrals, and so on, to evaluate potential discrimination in the community and to ensure that our policies work toward a more inclusive community. So all of these 5 boxes feed into a set of goals, objectives, policies, and specific measurable actions that we will be implementing in the next 8 years. Once this is completed, we are again required by state law to provide a report once a year to the City Council and to the state showing our progress in meeting our goals. So how much housing are we planning for? This is not something we get to decide. In this case, the housing element responds to an assignment that comes to us from the state of California and the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, and this is how it works. The state determines the number of housing units that need to be built in each region of California over an 8-year period. It's then up to our regional councils of government, in our case ABAG, to distribute those units to the cities and counties, and then it's up to each local government to prepare a plan showing how they're going to meet their assignment. So in 2019, the state determined that the 8-year need for the 9-county Bay Area was 441,176 units. So in other words, collectively, the 101 cities and 9 counties in the Bay Area need to plan for that amount of housing in order to balance supply and demand. Now that's a 2.5 times increase over what it had been during the last 8 years. They changed the way that number is calculated and counted the unmet need that hadn't been met in the last cycle. So the number went up by quite a bit. So the next thing is, how did they take that 441,000 units and distribute it to the individual cities and counties? So this is done through a process called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And the acronym for that is RHNA, R-H-N-A. In this case, what ABAG did is they created a 37-member committee comprised of elected officials, planners, and housing advocates from each county. And that committee met for a year, and they looked at different methods for distributing those homes around the region. Ultimately, they settled on a method that considered the number of residents in each community, but they weighted the assignments based on high resource areas so that more units were assigned to cities that have good schools, economic opportunities, amenities, and things that maybe aren't as present in our central cities. So more of the suburban communities received more of the housing assignments. What it means for San Rafael is our assignment for the next cycle is 3,220 units. It's about 3 times higher than it was the last time around. In the current cycle that we're in now, it was 1,007 units. So it's tripled. Now, what this means is not that we need to go out tomorrow and begin building 3,220 units. That isn't really what this is about. The private sector and the nonprofit sector build the housing. The city's role is to create the zoning and the land use rules and the policies and the fees and the other factors that help the private sector and the nonprofit sector build homes in the future. Ultimately, it's a market-driven process and it's up to the market, but there's a lot that the city can do to help support these actions. And you can see here that it's not just San Rafael that saw a big jump in our assignment. What you're looking at on this slide are the assignments for the current housing element period, which goes from 2015 to 2022 in those yellow bars, and the next assignment that we're beginning to work on now in the orange bars. So our number I mentioned has tripled, but in some places you can see the percentages of the increase in the other communities, in some of the other communities in Marin County have gone up by significantly more percentage-wise, although San Rafael's number is still the largest number in the county after the unincorporated area. Percentage-wise, we saw increases of 600, 700, and 800% in some of the smaller communities that haven't seen that much housing built in the last decade or two. So the other point about the housing, the RHNA, is that it's not just a lump sum number of 3,220 units. That number is broken down by income. So we can't just go out and build 3,000 single family homes that are market rate and say we've done our job and met our assignment. We need to plan for at least 1,349 units that are affordable to low income and very low income households. And I'll explain what that means in just a moment. The state establishes these income limits and they vary from county to county. They're updated each year. What you can see on this slide may surprise you, and that is a low income household of 4 in Marin County is defined as earning between $91,000 and $146,000 a year. So we haven't been building even for that segment, and that includes much of our workforce. A very low income household of 4 is a household earning less than $91,350. So when we talk about planning for housing for these income groups, we're talking about generally multifamily housing, a mix of rental housing and not just owner occupied housing, and housing that is subsidized in one form or another, or where the rents and incomes of the occupants are restricted or deed restricted and income restricted. So that is the area where the housing element really focuses, because that's the area where the market doesn't respond to the need. So when we talk about affordable housing, this is a federal term, and it is a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development standard that says your housing costs, which include utilities, your taxes, your insurance, and so forth, should be no more than 30% of your gross income. So if you're that very low income family of 4 who's earning $91,350 a year, if you're paying 30% of your income on housing, that's $2,284 a month. If you're spending more than that amount on your housing, you're considered to be cost burdened. And one of the goals of this process is to reduce the number of cost burdened households by providing more affordable housing in the city for low and very low income households. Right now, we're in a situation where most rental housing in San Rafael is not affordable to particularly to very low income households, and in many cases to low income households as well. So you can see these images are from Craigslist ads and the prices of various apartments in San Rafael, located in different neighborhoods of the city, ranging from $1,995 for a studio with a bathroom to $3,600 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. If you're paying 30% of your income in rent, that column in the right with those red numbers is how much you'd need to earn as a household for that rent to be affordable. And that presumes $200 a month for utilities. So we know we have many households in the city that are earning below those numbers. We know we have many residents in apartments in the city that are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So we mentioned earlier that we need to demonstrate capacity for 3,220 units of housing. We literally have to provide a map to the state that shows the location of all sites where housing can be built in the city by income category. And so what that means is that we need to do an exhaustive inventory of our housing opportunities. So what can we count? We can count any project that is approved but not yet built. We can count any vacant land where housing is allowed. So vacant lots, vacant commercial property where housing is permitted. Where we probably get the most potential is on what we are calling underutilized commercial sites. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because we can't just say, oh, it's a parking lot, therefore it's underutilized. We need to demonstrate to the state that it is in fact underutilized and a viable development site. We need to show examples of where similar properties have been developed in the city or in the county and essentially create the case that these sites are in fact viable. So that's an exercise that we go through as part of this process. We can also count institutional uses. So in some cases, church properties that have excess land, surplus public land, or large public sites that may be available for reuse. And we can count accessory dwelling units. So our in-law apartments, that's a little bit tricky as well, because we need to demonstrate who those accessory dwelling units are affordable to. In many cases, it's low and moderate income households, but often an accessory dwelling unit is renting for, $3,000 or $4,000 a month, or well, $3,000 a month anyway. So we need to have the data to demonstrate that an accessory dwelling unit is affordable to a particular income group before counting it. So we also mentioned earlier that we need to demonstrate that we're affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a new requirement from a bill that was passed a few years ago called AB 686. And what it means is that it's not enough to just identify sites and adopt policies and then put this on the back burner for 8 years. We need to proactively work to encourage housing construction, to reduce segregation in the community, and to promote equity and fair housing in the way that housing is sold and rented. And there's a lot of data that we need to collect and analyze that looks at patterns of racial and economic segregation in the city and actions that the city will take in the future to address these patterns and to make sure that housing opportunities are distributed around the city and are not concentrated in a single area. So a big part of the housing element is looking at existing patterns and coming up with plans to be more inclusive. So one question you might ask is, what happens if we don't comply? Or what happens if we do comply, but our housing element isn't good enough and the state doesn't certify it? There was a time 20 or 30 years ago where the answer to that question is, or was, not much. Not much would happen if you didn't have a certified housing element. But that's not the case anymore. Today, more than ever before, having a certified element is important, and there are real consequences to not getting certified. One is the loss of state funds, not just for housing, but potentially for transportation. So even things like road maintenance fees or paving fees could be jeopardized if a city doesn't have a certified housing element. We also face increased risk of lawsuits and fees and fines. These lawsuits could be from the state of California, which Huntington Beach experienced, or from advocacy groups, which happened in Pleasanton, or from developers and landowners. So it's in our best interest to be in compliance. So we're going to talk a little bit about the timeline, and I think, Ali, if you could maybe walk us through these last couple of slides. We have about maybe 5 more minutes, and then we're going to move to Q&A. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Barry. So we did start the housing element late this summer. In terms of a timeline, we are looking at, right now we're actually evaluating data, housing data, establishing what the need might be. Some of the information that was asked for in the chat was, what about, jobs, job numbers? And so we'll be providing information on that, collecting that data, so that we are able to provide that and kind of establish what our needs will be. We're going to be identifying potential housing sites and constraints to housing development. In the winter, we'll be developing new policies and programs that respond to the data that we collect and the input that we receive from the community, including input we received tonight. We have established a working group of 13 people that will be meeting to consider new housing policies and strategies to address housing. And then we're going to be working towards having a draft housing element ready by May 2022. That document will then go to the Planning Commission and the City Council as a draft and then submitted to the state for their comments. After we get state comments back in hopefully late summer, we'll revise the document based on that input and then bring it back to the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption. So on the screen, on paper, it looks like it's a really fast-paced process. That's because it is. We are, as all other cities are, obligated to have a housing element adopted by January of 2023. So we have, this is a pretty tight timeline, and Barry's going to be really working hard on trying to get us there. So let's see. So next slide. So I wanted to just make sure we mentioned some ways to participate earlier. I want to just go over a little bit more information on that. We have, as I mentioned, an email. We have created an email specifically for the housing element. That email is housing@cityofsanrafael.org. I encourage you, if you're interested, to sign up for email notifications. You can also visit our website at www.sanrafaelhousing.org. We're going to be posting additional materials on that website throughout the process, and I highly encourage you to access that website often, just to see what documents have been uploaded and to share the website information to friends, family members, neighbors, so that they are able to be informed and find ways to participate. We also encourage you to attend future meetings like this one tonight. We're going to be having additional meetings, as I mentioned, in winter and spring, and you're going to be invited to attend. We encourage creative solutions, ideas to be sent to the email that I mentioned. The other thing I wanted to mention is in late, I think it's late December, we're gonna be launching a survey to encourage participation and ideas. So I encourage you to take that survey and share it with friends, neighbors, so that we get as much information as possible. And then something really cool that I'm really excited about is we're looking into launching a interactive online mapping tool so that you can help us select housing sites around the city. It'll hopefully be a place where you can kind of enter different scenarios and hopefully find our solutions. And that will be helpful to us because it helps us get information from you on sites that we may have missed. And then finally, we also encourage you to attend city council meetings. We're going to be holding some study sessions. So those are great opportunities to participate in the process. Last but not least, we hope that you will reach out to your homeowners association, your neighborhood groups and civic organizations, and also encourage them to participate. Next slide, Barry. So before I pass on the mic to Barry, I just want to say, please share your housing story with us. We're really interested in hearing it. We have about 45 minutes left, half an hour left. So I encourage you to share your story tonight. If you don't have an opportunity or are feeling more comfortable sharing via email, please do so. We really want to hear your story. Many of you have stories that you would be very helpful to share to help us understand your experience and how we might be able to address needs. It's really helpful. The more information that we get from you, the more, the better data we have and the better we're able to address the housing need of the community. So that's it, Barry, all yours.
Great, thank you, Allie. And we are at last going to end the screen share. What we would like to do during the remainder of this meeting is a combination of responding to some of the questions that have come in via chat, but also to hear from you, those who are in the audience who would like to speak. Please feel free to use the raise hand feature, and we will bring you in and have you speak. If you wish to speak in Spanish or Vietnamese, we will ask our translators to do a simultaneous translation, both of your question and our response. I'm looking to see if I see any raised hands at this point. We will just jump in with responding to some of the chat questions, I think, until we see some hands going up. And again, I think in terms of the comments that we hope to get or what we hope to hear, Ali mentioned sharing your housing story, your ideas about where housing might be built in the city, your ideas about what kind of housing San Rafael really needs the most and would benefit from, your thoughts about what our priorities should be. There's a lot of stuff out there. What comes first? What should our priorities be? I think that will help frame some of the work that we're doing. We're doing a lot of research now. So to the extent your questions can guide us, that's great. And now I'm looking at the chat. While I'm doing that, Jake or Ali, do you want to respond to any of the questions that have come up?
Yeah, I'll jump in there first. I did see a comment about how can we focus on the most vulnerable in the population? How can we, I think the word was build from the bottom up, focusing on the lowest income ranges in RENA versus from the top down. And I think that the city has made some calculated efforts to do just that in building up a housing trust fund that we can use as a money source, a local money source that we can contribute into projects and then attract and build on that with state and county and federal dollars to achieve some of those projects that we do desperately need for the most in need of housing in the community. I know that the city is also interested in aging in place and supporting seniors and making sure that there's a variety of housing in the community, that you don't have to leave San Rafael as you get older. And so there's a couple of different ways. I invite you also to have a look at explore our housing web pages at sanrafaelhousing.org for other ways that we're working on just that issue.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of hands up at this point. I would like to bring people over, and I'm going to ask Alexis to help us out with that. If we could have John Privatali.
John, you should be able to speak now. I just asked you to unmute. Let's see.
Okay.
Oh, great. We can hear you, John.
Hey.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for having this great meeting. I've already learned a lot. Yeah, I'd be happy to tell my wife and my housing story briefly. So we moved to San Rafael 2.5 years ago from San Francisco, and we were fortunate enough to buy a house here in Terra Linda. But I should say that, you know, we were renters for probably 25 years, approximately. Mostly in the city before we were able to buy a house. And the reason I mention that is because obviously it would have been nice to be able to buy a home earlier in our lives. We were, I think, both 47 when we bought the house. And actually it was a combination of, you know, us, you know, eventually meeting the income needed to buy a house just through the progress of, I would say, normal progress of careers, but also money that we fortunately were able to inherit. And so, yeah, I mean, I see a tremendous amount of value in creating housing for younger people that makes it so they can get into housing and start accumulating wealth through equity earlier in their lives and not sort of experience what I would call this vicious cycle of using their income on rent. So they can't, it makes it difficult, obviously, for them to accumulate wealth like previous generations did.
Great, thank you, John. And we do have a couple other hands raised, so I think we're going to ask Grace Garrity if you'd like to make a comment. We'll bring you over.
Barry, as Grace is coming in, could you talk a little bit about the working group and how people may find out what the working group is working on when they're working on it?
I'm happy to do that. Yes, thanks. Some of you may, if you participated in the general plan, you may recall that we had a large 24-person working group that convened throughout that process. Continuing on that thread, the City Council asked that we create a 12 or 13 member working group for this process to also provide some guidance on policies and hear from different perspectives and different views about housing issues in the city, and identified some of the groups that should be represented on that working group. And I think in the spirit of the affirmatively furthering fair housing theme that's been given to us by the state, and that is so important locally, that working group includes a large number of, or a number of tenant organizations, of organizations representing the canal and multicultural community, as well as the development community, the nonprofit community, our neighborhoods, our homeowners, and so on. So there are 13 members. We have not yet met. We're actually trying to figure out the date of our first meeting. Those will be public meetings when they happen. We're anticipating there'll be 6 meetings, primarily between January and May, and we'll be posting Zoom links for the public to come to those meetings. But they're going to be, the process hasn't started yet, so we've just completed the process of selecting working group members. Thanks. And is Grace here?
Yes.
Hi, Grace.
Hi, Barry. I wanted to understand whether the city has any opportunity to, I guess, intervene sometimes. What I've noticed is that Aegis Living has been buying up a lot of property, and we can't count those towards RHNA goals. But I don't think we can prevent that either, correct?
What are the Aegis units that they're buying? Are these nursing and congregate care facilities, or are they independent living units? Because we can, if they're new units that are being built that are assisted living with kitchens and bathrooms, we can count them.
Well, I don't know how it's made up, but we have the new development that's going up on Frontage Road,
right?
And then they bought up on 880 Lincoln. So I don't know what the intentions are, and of course they already had several. So those are certainly areas that could have been used to build low-income housing, or to have Habitat for Humanity. I totally agree with what John Previtali was saying. We have so many rentals, but we're not helping and encouraging low-income families to actually buy and be able to start acquiring wealth. So that's a real issue. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure what we do in those instances. I don't expect necessarily an answer, but I think people should think about that. And there's so much rental available. I mean, as I drive around, and not just in San Rafael, all Marin, and even when I drive around the city and the peninsula, there are loads for rent signs. So there is rental units available. I'm sure, though, that most of them are all market rate, unless there are some nonprofit groups that would help subsidize low-income people with their rental payments.
Thanks, Grace. And I should add too that part of this goal, part of the goal of this process is to meet those RENA numbers, but this is also an opportunity for us to develop housing policies that reflect what we need locally. So if acquiring some of these rental properties and converting them to affordable housing units, although we don't get RENA credit for those because they're existing units, but it could be something the city pursues or explores through this process, is coming up with programs to do more of that kind of activity, because it's what we need and because it's what, we've heard from the community is needed.
Can I add something? Grace, I very much appreciate your bringing this topic up. I think it's something that we've struggled with for a long time. And, perhaps this is an opportunity for us to come up with some sort of creative solution for, what we're seeing. And what we're seeing is, these types of developments that do provide congregate care. There are some that are providing units that allow us to count towards RENA. But in the situations where we have congregate care, is there an opportunity to, do something with those? Is there an opportunity to require some sort of mix of types of units within those developments? I mean, something to think about, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think the goal here is to get these types of comments for us to kind of start thinking and getting our creative juices going. So thank you, Grace.
Okay, I think Ray Lorber is next. If we could bring Ray onto the call.
Okay, Ray, you should be on deck now.
Here we are. Hey, Ray.
Hey, thank you. Hi, Barry. Excellent meeting today. Do appreciate the information that you provided. But there are certain things that we are very concerned about. In all honesty, I have to be clarify that I am a member of Catalyst, and we are concerned about the lack of local control, where the neighborhood council members cannot really get involved in a lot of these decisions because of SB 9, SB 10. A lot of us are getting up in the years, and our wealth is in our homes, and we're very concerned about what would happen if a 10-plex got built next door, or a duplex that potentially can ruin the parking, the traffic, the fire hazard, etc., and the neighborhood. So can you all produce a map showing where the property is located that you'll be identifying?
We can, Ray. Thanks for asking that question. And we're actually going to ask for your help and everyone else's help once we get that map put together to make sure that the sites that we're looking at are realistic and that the numbers that we're talking about are are numbers that, well, I know that not everyone's going to be comfortable with all the numbers, but we are going to look for your input on all of that. I'll say this, having just gone through the general plan update and the downtown precise plan, there was a real concerted, intentional effort to locate housing in areas where there was transit, in places like downtown San Rafael and at Northgate, where the infrastructure was there and where the opportunities would not impact the single family neighborhoods to the extent they would if we just said anything goes. And we're not looking at a lot of upzoning existing neighborhoods through this process. If we were going to be doing that, we would have done it in the general plan update. We, at this point, believe that we have sufficient zoning to meet our arena without changing a lot of the existing zoning. The SB9, SB10 issue is a little bit separate. That's, again, as a state mandate. And maybe, you know, Ali may want to speak to that, but at least for the housing element side, that the sites that we're looking at, I don't believe there'll be any surprises when you see the list.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot of information on SB9. We're currently evaluating what it all means, but I think what I would want to say is that it's an example of, you know, some of what's coming down from the state and the need for us to really be more proactive in identifying locations for additional housing, because as the state is seeing that the need is there, they're trying to come up with solutions, and those solutions may not always be the best solution for us. And so, you know, it'll be important for us to really be more proactive in identifying sites that are appropriate and are the right solution for the city. So, like I said, we're in the middle of evaluating what SB9 and what SB10 would mean for us. You know, the SB10, I think, is really more of allows the city to rezone, and it's an opportunity for us to be able to do that if we find that we're not going to be able to meet our housing numbers. But I think we're on track of being able to identify enough sites to be able to meet that number. So I don't think it would necessarily apply to us. SB2 is a different story, and I don't have enough details right now to be able to speak to it, but something that I can provide in the future.
I would like to clarify one statement that I made related to a chat that just flew past me. I have nothing against people who live in duplexes. That's not the issue at all. The issue is one of, if you increase the housing in our neighborhood dramatically, it's going to cause a lot of problems in what we have purchased, and it's going to affect our house value. Having 100 people in our neighborhood as compared to 1,000 people, it's going to change things. There's nothing against people who live in duplexes. There are areas in the county or in the city that can handle duplexes very well, and there are a lot of them here already, and that's fine. I myself have lived in duplexes in the past, but I am concerned about what SB9, SB10 can do to our current home.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. And let's hear from Kate Rafael.
Okay, I am bringing Kate on, and while I do that, I am also going to just do one last switch of our interpreters. Okay, so Kate, you are on deck now.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
We can, thanks, welcome.
Yes, hi, thank you. I just have one story and just a few suggestions. I am 32 years old. I grew up in Terra Linda, and I now work in San Rafael in the housing providing industry. And recently I had a client who went through the process of getting a single family home in the downtown area, all the way through the process of entitlement, and basically it just was not going to pencil out, and he was unable to build it. And I reached out to local groups. I reached out to Paul Jensen at the time, and I was desperate to try to figure out a way to put the project together. It was only going to be an 8-unit apartment building, but nevertheless, it's units, and some of them were going to be affordable. And, it ended up that we were unable to put it together. No one was interested in buying it. And, it was sold as a single family house to someone. So that's just one example, but I do see that housing providers are continuously disincentivized around, going down the line of even being in the business and in creating more opportunities for housing, because, we're kind of looked at the bad guy, as the bad guy. So I think that it's important to involve the local housing providers that are these mom and pop landlords that really do care about the community, that are from Marin and want to, continue to make sure that there are people that can stay here and have affordability, and, keep them from being driven out and being taken over by these bigger operations. So I just encourage you to provide incentives for housing providers if you are looking to them to help you achieve these goals. And lastly, I just want to say that I drive by every single day at 2nd and Irwin, the vacant Irwin Plaza building. It's been vacant for years. I believe BioMarin purchased it. They're not using it for offices. I, being in commercial real estate, am seeing, lots of empty locations. And so I encourage you to look at, the kind of main corridors of the city where you can, repurpose these commercial buildings into residential places that people can walk to, transportation, and hopefully avoid, having impacts on traffic. So that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for your comments, Kate. Really good, thoughtful information there. I see Linda Jackson is here.
Oh, I actually just promoted Jerry.
Sorry, Jerry. Yep. Linda, you're next. Okay. Let's hear from Jerry. Thanks.
Unmute. Okay.
You are now unmuted. Welcome.
Hey, excellent. I'd just like to mention the last time I think I went to a housing meeting downtown San Rafael. I think the current mayor was on the city council and Mark McGuire was there. And I kind of got up and said the same thing I'm going to say now, is to try to promote RP zones, where you have these zones that people, designers, builders, we don't really bang up against all the hard zoning rules for projects. We kind of offer sort of creative solutions and what you can do on the property as an alternative to the zoning that's been designated inside the zoning requirements. So I did a project a long time ago in Novato that I got to put in 10. I'm a designer, so I designed 10 townhouses there on their own little lots, because it was an RP zone. And the lots were only like 3,000 square feet each, and 2 stories over a garage. So it kind of fitted in there real well. And I keep looking at projects that could be a lot more, maybe more intense than the R1 zoning. The RP would open up more interest, like the lady before was representing more hometown builders. Maybe if there was more experimental or RP zoning available, you would get more, a little bit more density. Maybe it doesn't have to be big, huge units. I mean, people, if you're looking for affordable housing and get people off the streets and out of the tents that are underneath the freeway, I mean, you could live comfortably in, 200-300 square feet if it was done right with community kitchens and stuff. But there's hardly any zoning designations that back up that kind of experimentation. So that's kind of like my pitch, I guess, for that. So anyway,
Gary, can you explain what RP stands for?
I'm actually not that familiar with RP. Yeah.
Well, that's what they called it in Novato, I guess. It's something that you would, there's no setbacks required. You come in with setbacks, you come in with a design, you kind of put it out as a precise development plan perhaps, and then the planners look at it and kind of go, okay, this would work, but you're not forced into the typical lot size. Up there was like 4,500 square feet if you were in a regular R1 zone or an R2 or something, but you're in the RP zone, you could put a smaller piece of fee simple property in there. So we kind of had 8 townhouses that were kind of in line, and then it kind of got to the back, and we kind of put 2 in around the turning circle, and it worked out really, it really worked out well. When they give you a little bit freer hand to design the development. So that's kind of a pitch for a different zone than your typical R1 zone or a commercial zone or a R2 or R3 zone. So.
I see someone has typed into the chat that it's a residential professional zone. And we do have something like that in San Rafael. We also, a couple of things. There are a couple of zoning districts that have been created, Jerry, for getting the exact type of development that you described. It's kind of a very flexible, you know, where we might have industrial uses and residential uses that are compatible with each other. The area around Lindaro and between Davidson Middle School and downtown, there's, you know, some flexibility in that area. We might look at something like that. The other thing is that all of downtown San Rafael was just rezoned in August as part of the downtown precise plan. We've adopted new zoning regulations that eliminate the density standards and eliminate some of the floor area ratio requirements and the other things that may have made it difficult to make some of those projects pencil out. And we're hopeful that the new zoning will bring some of that flexibility as long as the uses are somewhat compatible with each other, that we can have that more mixed and diverse land use pattern. So we're on board with what you're describing. I think that's exactly the kind of thing we're looking to do. And there definitely are some opportunities near downtown, especially to do that.
Barry, can I add to that?
Another idea I had was a long time ago, San Rafael was thinking of annexing Silvera Ranch and St. Vincent's to get it into the city sphere. And I think Marinwood just went crazy over that, and it kind of stopped all that annexation. But I kept thinking of, now that we have the SMART train and you have like a transportation corridor, there may be sections of St. Vincent's and Silvera that would be perfect to have. It's just like raw land out there that you could create some kind of multi housing situation right next to train stops, and you wouldn't really need a lot of traffic. I mean, let's say you limited the car parking or the cars and just say, okay, you got to use public transit. I mean, these are the kind of ideas we almost have to start looking at now, instead of just creating developments that then you have to have 2 cars per every, you know, like if you have a 2-bedroom, you need 2 cars. You have 1 bedroom, you need 1 car. You need a lot of parking facility. But if you're out there by the railroad and they put a little hub in there, a little station, and you could annex maybe a corridor right in there. Of course, that's kind of in the county now, but I'm thinking that's the kind of long range planning solutions it would be interesting to try to, you know, just to try out, basically, see if we can get out of the R1 and everybody has to have a car parking space. You know, that's another idea. So
thanks, Jerry. We're going to move on to our last raised hand, which is Linda Jackson, and if we can bring Linda in. Jerry, really appreciate your comments this evening. Thank you.
Okay, get my camera going. Hi, thank you.
Hello, Linda.
Hi, what
Welcome.
a great Housing Element 101. And thank you so much. This is such a great introduction to a very complicated topic. Yeah, I'll just share my housing story very briefly. Like John, I was a little bit older when we bought our first house, and we actually bought it with my mother. So we had an intergenerational household for many years. And when she died, we actually rented out her room for a while. Then our kids grew and they left. We didn't need such a big house anymore. So we sold it to a young family who turned that extra space into an ADU to help them, I think, make the payments, but it did create another unit in the community. But the challenge that we had is older people who love San Rafael is that there aren't a lot of options to move to, whether you want to buy a smaller unit or whether you want to rent a smaller unit. Especially we prefer to live near downtown. So we actually found a place. We found the very last place in a new, I think it was the only new housing built in downtown in about 20 years. That's changed. We have some new units that are now on board. But the point I'm trying to make is that your housing needs change over your lifespan. And so when you're young, maybe you're good in an ADU, then an apartment. I mean, definitely need a house. The house is good to have when you have kids, if you can afford it. And then when you get older, you need a smaller space again. And frankly, there are times when you get where you might need an assisted living unit like Aegis or memory care for if you're in your 80s. And San Rafael has a lot of older people. So we had a housing stock that was built in the 80s and 90s, and all those homeowners are still love living in San Rafael, but there aren't a lot of places for them to move to. I think one of the things that there should be work on at the state is to count assisted living as units. I think a judge recently ruled that it is a unit down in Southern California, so that may be just decided by the courts, but memory care as well. And so that would make a difference. And certainly ADUs make a difference for homeowners older homeowners, either to downsize into or to have companionship as they grow into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s. So, but we're all in this together. So I really look forward to seeing what you are coming up with as options, particularly the biggest challenges for affordable housing for extremely low income households and for people who have need supportive housing. But we also need all kinds of housing. So I wouldn't, we have a huge need for future assisted living for the people who are growing into their 80s and 90s in Terra Linda and elsewhere in the city, as well as apartments downtown. So that independent living for young and old. The apartment we live in, we're all ages, apartment building. And it's just a joy to be here. And so look forward to that, to being part of this effort and to the good work you're doing.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for being here this evening. I don't see any other hands raised, and we are just a few minutes past 8 o'clock. I do want to see if there are any questions in the chat that either Jake or Allie would like to respond to, and also let folks know that if we didn't respond to your question this evening, we will prepare written responses to some of these questions that are coming in and post those to the website. We are going to prepare a summary of tonight's meeting and the feedback that we got, some kind of high-level notes, and we'll be putting in responses to some of the comments and questions, which are great, by the way, and thank you for that. Allie or Jake?
Yeah,
Allie?
yeah, I'll go ahead and just something that I really want to make sure we respond to is how we're going to be more proactive about communicating as we continue doing the work for the next year or so. That we're looking at doing social, adding notification through social media. We're really working, the four of us have been really working, actually more like the three of you have been doing a great job trying to find the right way to reach out to people and to reach out as much as possible. We send out notifications, but we also provided flyers directly to community members, CBOs, and we'll continue to, find better ways to communicate and try to find ways to do it in language that everybody can understand. I'm not talking about just translation, but just, easy to understand text language. So that's what we're doing. Hopefully everyone found this helpful, and we really, really, really appreciate your participation tonight.
Great. Jake, did you want to add anything?
I don't know if there's anything else to follow up on. I think that Ali has said it all. Certainly do make note, write it down, housing@cityofsanrafael.org. That's our email address. We're very open. We want to hear from you. We would love to hear your thoughts. Definitely sign up for the email blasts and be looking for postcards from us. We are planning to send out mass distributions of postcards. So you'll be getting, you'll receive little blasts from us in many different media forms. And we really do thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you at our coming events.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks, Ali, and thank you, Alexis, for troubleshooting our technical issues this evening. Thank you to our translators as well for being there and for doing a great job. I do want to say we'll be posting this meeting on YouTube within a week or so, and that'll be linked at our website, sanrafaelhousing.org. If you have a friend or colleague or neighbor who missed this meeting and wanted to see it, or even if they didn't want to see it, please give them the URL. We'd love to get the word out to everyone who is interested. We're going to be doing more meetings like this. At least for the time being, they'll be on Zoom. We may transition to in-person meetings as conditions change. There's the tool that Ali mentioned earlier, where you help us identify housing sites. It's called Balancing Act, and we're working on developing an app so that folks can help identify housing sites or weigh in or let us know what they think about different sites and how many units is the right number of units for different sites. So we're looking forward to some interactive and fun exercises. We also have a lot of work ahead of us, reaching out to all of the stakeholders in San Rafael, our nonprofit developers, our supportive service providers, other government agencies, and our residents and businesses. So please reach out to us and let us know how we can best work with you in the months ahead as we go through this process. With that, I think we'll say goodnight for now, and we'll see you all at a future meeting. Thanks.